study. This is also a really, really interesting one. Can you maybe explain that as well?
Okay, so in this study, this study is actually, I would find that this study is actually very interesting because it's a follow-up of the previous study. So the previous study looks at milk, and this study looks at egg, because I guess, like you mentioned, these are things that most people would be consuming every day, right? Almost every day.
Yeah.
So for this study aims to compare the whole body and muscle protein metabolic response after the consumption of whole eggs with egg whites. So they actually compared two scenarios where the participants in the study would perform a single bout of training, resistance exercise, and after exercise they either consume whole eggs or egg whites. So the authors would then measure or analyze the blood and muscle biopsy samples to look at the protein synthetic rates.
And sorry to interrupt. What are the difference? So maybe those who are not aware, what are the difference between these two? Why are we comparing egg whites and whole eggs in the first place?
Okay, so we know that egg whites is just purely 18 grams of protein in this case, whereas the whole eggs would be 18 grams of protein with 17 grams of fat. Right. So this study essentially is just, if you break it down to its essence, it's really comparing protein plus fat versus just protein only. Would there be a difference in the myofibrillar protein synthetic rate?
Okay.
So in this study, what they found was that this study was actually one of the first few studies, in fact, to look at ingesting whole eggs compared to egg whites in this young man population. And this study was very smartly designed in a sense where it is isonitrogenous. So what does isonitrogenous means is that the nitrogen compound between these two are actually the same. So you realize that whole eggs is 18 grams of protein, egg whites is also 18 grams of protein, but they only differ because whole eggs has 17 grams of fat.
Right.
And they really show that the whole food would actually demonstrate differential anabolic properties in the skeletal muscle tissue. So this study has many implications. And what they did was they analyzed some of the muscle protein synthetic rate, and they found out three main findings. Firstly, they show that for both these conditions, the muscle amino acid sensing, the amino acid uptake, it did not seem to contribute to the differences observed between the conditions. In other words, it is not the presence of amino acid, it is not the amount of amino acid uptake that contributes to the difference, but rather it is actually the other food component in the yolk itself. Second finding that they found was that the leucine, as we know, which is a key component for muscle building block, is actually the same for these conditions. So it's unlikely that the composition of the amino acids would influence the muscle synthesis rate. So we know that they actually balance out the entire equation, and pretty much they attribute the differences to be found based on perhaps it's the yolk itself. So the third point that they found was that the yolk is actually pretty much a promising area for anabolic properties. In other words, the egg yolk itself consists of microRNAs, vitamins, minerals, lipids, and these molecules have been shown to be beneficial in the transcriptional and translational process of protein development. So in other words, the yolk itself is capable of modulating the muscle protein synthesis rate after food consumption. Yeah. So the implication of this finding is that people have to take their yolks. And I think I think most people are concerned about is the yolks because people are concerned about taking in too much cholesterol, right?
Definitely. That's one of the biggest things, I think. And nowadays, I think it's just recently gotten into Japan, but they sell frozen egg whites now in Japan. And I know in the States, that's like a big thing. You have a carton and you just have egg whites in there, and people just buy that, and then they consume that instead of consuming whole eggs nowadays. So I think the whole notion of only eat egg whites is a big thing.
Yes, indeed. And I think in this study, what they're trying to advocate is that it is still a popular practice, like you said, to discard the yolk when multiple eggs are consumed. And I think most people, if you see some of them in the gym, they would go to the gym, they would eat their eggs, they would pluck open their eggs, remove the yolk, and just down the egg whites. Yeah. But we do have to know that in this study, they actually highlighted that the yolk itself is a nutrient-dense product, and being an area of high bioactive compounds, the removal of this yolk may actually limit the stimulation of muscle protein synthesis rate. So we do want to suggest that it is not just about consuming enough protein perhaps, but it's also to make sure that we have a well-balanced nutrient and protein-dense food to optimize muscle protein synthesis rate.
And just to go back and clarify one thing about this particular study is that, so with the whole eggs and egg whites, the subject took it after resistance training, but they were not isocaloric, but it didn't need to be isocaloric in order to do this experiment because the amino acids or the extra calories were not the reason why it stimulated more muscle protein synthesis, but it was more the content of the yolk itself and the other molecules inside the yolk was what made the difference. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. What they found based on previous research is that the extra calories didn't influence the muscle anabolic potential. So regardless whether you consume high calories or not, it did not seem to influence or amplify the anabolic properties of the dietary amino acids.